Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Medicine 3.0, your podcast for AI and healthcare, precision health. And this week, a really cool podcast with Jennifer Gibson. She is a dietitian. She teaches other dietitians. She works with the Chicago Bears, Chicago Blackhawks, many Olympians. And what I thought was super cool was her perspective on international athletes. Some really great takeaways on you don't have to make nutrition complicated. So listen up, sit back, enjoy. All right, Jen, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, thank you so much. It's great to be on.
Okay, I'm very excited about this, but I'm going to start off. Why don't you tell us how you got where you're at, knowing what you know?
Well, if we want to go back to the dawn of time, I always say I became a dietitian because I grew up in an Italian family where food was just like the central dogma in our house. And so, just growing up with just a family that was, obsessed with gardening, organic gardening before it was cool. We ate at home, we cooked at home, food was just a central part of our life. And then growing up an athlete and also being a science geek, and having very blue collar parents that said you need to get a degree that's going to get you a job, becoming a registered dietitian fit all those things. So I was able to kind of get into a professional area where I, could be involved in food, could actually get a job, and also blend my love of science and exercise. And so, did my undergraduate training in Toronto, Canada, and Victoria, British Columbia, and became a registered dietitian, and then kind of did extra education in exercise physiology through a master's in XPhys, and then the IOC diploma in sport nutrition through the International Olympic Committee. And I've been practicing as elite sport dietitian, just basically because I've had the privilege of really only working at the elite, either Olympic or pro level, for 19 years now. So that's kind of how I came into it. You name the sport, I've probably worked for them or with them.
That's amazing. And obviously lived in some amazing places. Victoria is one of my favorite, British Columbia, Victoria is just gorgeous. So yeah. And we were talking beforehand, you're currently in Colorado.
I am. Yeah. So I have a great situation here. I'm currently, full-time living in Colorado, but I'm actually the sport dietitian for the Chicago Blackhawks. So, and I'm also associate prof at University of Colorado Springs. So I kind of travel back and forth to Chicago with our team and meet them on the road. But thankfully, I get to call this my
home. That is amazing. I was in Chicago last week and the weather was amazing.
Yes.
And it would fool you. It would make you think that it's like that all the time.
I know Chicago, honestly, Chicago summers downtown are incredible. Like they are really, really magical. But yes, don't base your whole, don't base your decision on those. They will fool you and draw you in.
Yeah. I went on a run along the lake and I was like, oh, I could live here.
Yes.
But not really. So
you can for 4 months a year for sure.
So yeah, exactly 4 months a year. So I'm very excited to dig in lots of different places with you. Obviously working with elite athletes is different than working with kind of general population of people. And I wonder if you could just tell me what you think the biggest difference is between kind of your work with elite athletes versus like a regular dietitian working with somebody, out of a regular dietetics office.
Yeah. So I think something I often say to my athletes is that oftentimes when you're an athlete at the Olympic or professional level, what you're actually doing to your body it's not healthy anymore. Okay. So we've gone beyond healthy exercise habits, healthy ways to take care of your body. When you're a pro athlete or an Olympic athlete and your body is your literal job, your job is to train it to the absolute limit and oftentimes beyond those limits on purpose in order to really just achieve that absolute peak performance and kind of that 1%, ability, so to speak, that your body can all, put out. And so that is the biggest difference is we're dealing with people that are doing things that are actually pretty unhealthy. If you look at, an NFL player, at the age of 50. There's a lot going on. There was a lot of trauma and a lot of wear and tear put on those tires. So basically, part of my job is to understand the impact of that exercise and that training on their physiology, on the long-term health, on the body, on the brain, and to really work at a very specific level in the world of performance nutrition to help optimize performance, but then also to help to mitigate some of the things that are going on because of all that excessive training. The body is under a lot of stress when you're training, 20, 40, 60 hours a week, depending on the athlete.
Yeah. So a big part of it is recovery. So fueling so that they can actually recover and kind of keep doing this. So when you think about, like, everybody tries to like put value on whatever the work is that they do and say, like, this is how big a piece this plays in your performance. When you talk to your athletes, like, how do you try to communicate how important the nutrition part is of what they're doing?
Yeah. So yeah, like I always remind them that their body is their job. And nutrition is the fuel for the car. Nutrition is the fuel for that body. And for our guys, if their body isn't working, they are either unemployed, they don't get paid, or they don't get their next big paycheck. And so literally this thing has to work. If you're a regular person and you get a cold or you get an injury and you take a couple weeks off, your CrossFit or whatever it is that you do, you're still going to your day job and getting things done. These guys are literally, it's their livelihood. And so how we fuel impacts not only that actual peak performance. We know if we fuel appropriately and supplement appropriately, we can actually optimize performance. But as you mentioned before, recovery after that, so we can do it again and again. And then also noticing that, hey, we're having chronic kind of inflammatory processes going on. We are having issues with our immune system being compromised all the time. So kind of having the guys realize that it's not just fuel and refuel, it's taking care of our health, taking care of our immune system, taking care of the inflammatory processes, so that overall we are doing a lot of damage, but we're trying to mitigate that to the best of our ability while they're having this career. And generally speaking, it's a very short career. It's basically,
Right.
most of these athletes have started to become very competitive at the age of 8 or 9. And then maybe they can, in hockey, we can sometimes go to like 30, 35, in professional hockey, but most pro sports, by the time you've hit the big 3-0, you're a geriatric elite athlete. So it's a very short, concentrated period of time where we really have to kind of go, we got to put all the chips in if you want to maximize this career.
Yeah, it's fascinating. The amount of stress on the body and maybe that seems short, but it's many years of that kind of stress. It's interesting. There's a blood test it's used in the hospital, and now it's starting to be used by kind of longevity doctors. It's the company's name is Sapir Bio, and it looks at immune function. And so you mentioned, like, people's immune systems are struggling, and they're having inflammation in their bodies. And so I'm curious, you mentioned trying to solve this through proper nutrition and proper supplementation. And how do you kind of think about that, splitting that split between nutrition and supplementation?
Yeah. So something that's vital and kind of ties into what you were saying that we do with all of our athletes is they have regular blood work done. And so we start off as the base. Where are you at nutritionally with markers that we can measure in your blood work? And so, typically for us, a typical athlete blood panel would be similar to what your doctor might run, which is your CBC, your CMP profiles, a cholesterol panel. And then we add on some additional fun things, like maybe we look at their thyroid function, we look at their vitamin D, we look at a nice robust iron panel. We look at some B vitamins, we do an omega-3 index, and then we might look at some trace minerals like magnesium. Those are really some basic parameters that we look at to kind of see, okay, what do we actually need to do to supplement? Because I'm a big believer in supplementing based on needs, evidence of needs. Right now, you could go into, any supplement store and, they will tell you can take everything. You need this, you need this, you need this. And you go home and you got 15 bottles and you don't even know what you're taking. And so we want to use evidence to inform how are we filling those needs of maybe deficiencies or areas where we need to kind of supplement with that are low. And then we kind of use that as the base. But we build the cake, we build the recipe mainly with real food and nutrition practices. And also educating the players around, right now in the supplement space, some athletes, they believe that like a protein powder is somehow like magically better than just like a regular piece of meat. And it's because of the marketing and the hype, and like chicken breasts don't have like black containers and like matte black, imaging, and broccoli doesn't have a powdered product with a nice, athlete endorsement. So it's really trying to educate them around like the reality of that and saying these are convenience products and they absolutely can fit, but actually the whole food is your number one source of nutrients. And these other products are actually highly processed forms of these things, like a regular whey protein powder, again, has a place and a time, but it's got flavoring, it's got artificial sweeteners in it, it's been processed, the whey's been processed down to kind of be able to dissolve in water, and all these things have been put into it, and so, but I think what's happened now with just marketing and kind of the way that our supplement world has just exploded, people are kind of saying, hey, I need all this, and it's like, no, actually, let's see what you actually need fundamentally from a deficiency perspective, and then let's try to use like the number one source of nutrients, which is like whole foods, and that way we can actually fuel our body with the most amount of nutrition bang for buck.
Yeah, I mean, you'll love this story. So in the office, we test like protein bars, protein powders, and there's a new one called David, and it has great macros when you look at it: 150 calories, 28 grams of protein. And we were testing it, and Kelly, who was here, and we tested it. We're like, well, it doesn't taste great, but like the macros are so good. And Kelly was like, why don't you eat chicken breast? And we're like, oh yeah, that seems like a pretty good idea too. So I think focusing on whole foods, and whole foods are so much more filling also.
Yeah, and I think we're just in a time now where we're just being overwhelmed with messaging, and people are on their devices all the time. They're on Instagram, they're on YouTube, they're on all these channels. Even if you just open up your browser to start a search or check your email, the little bots know I'm a dietitian, and so I get all kinds of supplements and diets and celebrities telling me about this new thing, and it's just really noisy. And obviously it's a huge billion-dollar market and industry, but I feel like sometimes people just forget that it's okay to eat regular food, and it's good to learn to cook and make your own meals at home, and we don't need someone to deliver 25 pre-made frozen meals. Like, you can do this, people. We can get back to basics and get this done.
That's so true. That's so true. There's times where I get a little lazy and I'm like, oh, maybe I should order, because I've never used any of the meal services. And I just cooked up a ton of chicken tenderloins over the weekend as I was meal prepping for the week. And it's not that hard. It's not that hard to spend some time meal prepping. And I'm curious. So you obviously, when you're working with your athletes, there's a time and a place where you control what they eat, right? Like if they're in the clubhouse or the locker room and they're in the training center, and you're helping them know what to eat. But how do you help them do that at home?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So that's kind of athlete population dependent. And I say that because it's really culturally different, funny enough. The NFL players tend to be a little bit less motivated to cook for themselves. I'm going to generalize the population. It's not all of them. So in those cases, we will work with maybe personal chefs that either come at home or will deliver to their home, or some of those convenience meal prep kind of companies to assist them with their meal prep. And that's something that tends to work well in that population. In hockey, what's great about pro hockey players and actually Olympians too is a lot of them have kind of done billeting situations where they've had to live on their own. And a lot of them actually kind of like to cook and know how to cook. And so with that, we've actually done a lot of like cooking demos at the Olympic Training Center where I used to work. We have an entire teaching kitchen where we bring them in and teach them recipes. Just as recently, a few months ago at development camp for the Blackhawks, we had the players go out to almost like a chef competition and Iron Chef competition where they all cooked together, and we kind of cooked a bunch of different meals and had a competition. So it's really just trying to give them ideas and then education along with those things. And so that's kind of, we really are trying to teach them those hands-on skills. So it kind of depends. Some of them get a bit more, they have a bit more money and maybe they can kind of go a certain way, or they're just kind of wanting to know about recipes and ways to do it at home.
Yeah, it's interesting when I think about like your work with elite athletes, it translates so well to like regular people. Like it comes back to, okay, eat real food, eat whole foods, eat fresh foods, cook for yourself. If you can afford it, use a chef, like, but it comes back to those core things. And you mentioned kind of the noise in the system. And like, I'm constantly asked, like, what's the best diet? Like, is this supplement really going to add 5 years to my life? And so how do you help your athletes kind of navigate that noise?
Yeah. So we kind of have this tenant that we talk about, and it's looking at, again, kind of looking at that pyramid example again, like we have to look at the overall composition of our diets. And if we are having like whole real foods, I call them first generation foods. So foods where I actually am eating them as they are created. Like this carrot came out of the ground. That's a first generation food. A veggie straw chip that I give my 4-year-old, that's a bit more processed. That's not a first generation food. But taking a look at a composition and kind of evaluating it maybe through like, a meal tracker for a few days. Okay, am I having like at least 90% of my diet is coming from whole real foods, and that's the first pass that we do. So, maybe instead of having the breakfast sausages in the morning, we flip that out and have some eggs. Maybe it's, you kind of, instead of having all that cereal that maybe has extra sugar or extra ingredients in it, even though it says it's keto, it has all these extra things, let's go to oatmeal. Let's just go to just good old steel oats. Let's try to just clean that up. And that fundamentally creates such a great environment for, again, with an elite athlete, I'm obviously getting a bit more detailed than that. We're getting into how many grams of carbs they need to have, how many grams of protein, and their fluid recommendations. It's all very customized, but at a very global level, that's what we do. And then like we said earlier, then we kind of say, okay, where can we maybe add these little supplements in to help? Maybe you're a vegan athlete and we need to use a pea protein product because that's just going to be the only way we get your protein needs in, because you're a 300-pound vegan. That happens. So we kind of look at it that way, but looking at it really fundamentally from like that, then it cuts out a lot of noise. And then when we look at supplementation as, okay, where are we deficient and how do we go about it? It just helps to simplify things. And as we kind of practice that as our way that we approach our nutrition, there's a bit of relief because, yeah, it just makes sense, and then we can kind of call out the BS too, and generally with supplementation, I tell my guys, if the claims sound too good to be true, they probably are. Like somebody would have invented a prescription for this, so I love that you love sea moss. I still don't even really know what that is. It sounds delicious, but is that going to cure cancer? No. You know what I mean? And so like, let's just think about this rationally, and I think that's the other thing too. We're dealing with a lot of deception. Like the FDA can't keep up with regulating these companies and these claims. They've got a lot going on. And so just teaching them to be kind of educated around it. And then also having them understand when they're kind of being sucked into something, and oftentimes with our guys, it's like if you get a product that's being endorsed by like a vet or a few other guys in the league or whatever, and you kind of get swept up into the hype of it.
Yeah. And it's interesting to me also because I feel like there's some things that I might even think are a little bit dangerous for people at high levels. And in kind of a general patient population or member population for me, like one of those things honestly is like electrolyte drinks.
Mm-hmm.
Like when people are slamming like element after element after
Yes.
element all day
Yes.
long, and I'm
Yes.
like, you're not sweating at your desk.
No.
I,
No.
I don't think you should do that.
Like the average American needs 2,000 to 2,500 milligrams of sodium, and and they get it. People all get that just from their habitual diet. And now you're adding an additional 2,000 milligrams because you're drinking 5 elements or whatever it is. It has 700 or 1,000 milligrams of sodium in it. And now you're wondering why
Yep.
you've got high blood pressure, you know? Yeah,
Yep.
yeah,
Yep.
exactly. Yeah, yep. We see that too. I think the other big item that we battle with is caffeine. Caffeine is everywhere now. It's like in, you know, you have your coffee, but then you have maybe some gummies that have it, or another, you know, a different drink that has it. Like it's being infused and added into electrolyte drinks, and it's everywhere. And then we might have players that are experiencing sleeplessness or nervousness, or, you know, even just high anxiety. And in a sport like hockey, for example, where it's like a real stop and go, like high kind of heart demand sport, and football, we have to be really careful with that kind of overstimulation as well. We traditionally used to see it in football when they were completely over caffeinated or had too much pre-workout, they would be puking their brains out. So that was usually the first thing we went to. There's a lot of puking on the sidelines that doesn't get on the air. Does happen a lot in football. Yeah. Been there, seen it. Yeah. But you're usually the first thing you go to is how much pre-workout? What did you do for your caffeine? How overstimulated are you right now? Because your gut's just saying no bueno. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's interesting. And like, I mean, just going back to the noise in the system, like you see people on Instagram, you know, dry scooping pre-workout, and, you know, I'm going to do 3 scoops this time. And people don't realize that some of those things actually are dangerous. And so it's really interesting. So if you say your athletes are kind of experiencing this social media noise, do you try to point them towards anything? Like if you know they're going to keep learning and keep like wanting to geek out on this stuff, is there anywhere that you point them and say, hey, if you really want to learn about this stuff, this is where you should go? Kind of
yeah. Usually they say, come talk to me. And then what we usually do is we kind of try to just kind of go into the literature. You know, we try to go into the scientific literature and just see, like, you know, a lot of times we have products that have like zero science behind them. They're just like a claim. So we say, hey, this is a new product. It's claiming it has, you know, whatever, this new ingredient, this new novel thing. I'll do the geek for you. I'll go into the literature and we'll pull it up and we'll kind of see where have the trials been? What's the research saying? And if we can't find any, then, you know, we probably need to be cautious of that. The other thing too is I often remind our athletes, like, human physiology has not changed that much. Okay. And like, but the world of nutrition and supplementation and this noise absolutely has, you know, even if you go back to 40 years ago, you know, like with Arnold Schwarzenegger doing, you know, what supplements did he really have? Hardly, besides steroids, you know, and he admitted to those, but, you know, or you go back, or sometimes I kind of reference, I've traveled around the world because of the Olympics. Literally, I've traveled to almost every country, and you go to countries in Asia or Eastern Europe where they have these phenomenal gold medal winning athletes, and literally the country doesn't even sell sport drink. They don't even sell sport drink. They don't literally have supplements. Like you go to try to buy any sort of commercial sport drink, and they may have one item that's just called a hypotonic. And so you remind them, like, well, how is this guy a 6-time gold medalist and he's just eating food, you know, and maybe he throws some salt in his drink. So it's also just trying to like reset that, you know, like our sweat physiology has not changed. Probably, I don't know how far back. I haven't studied sweat physiology back, but I could probably put it, you know, I bet you we're still sweating in a very similar physiological manner as we've done for thousands of years, you know, and so we just got to remember that the physiology hasn't changed, but the hype and the product and that's all changed, right? So being aware of that too. Like, have we really just changed the way we sweat in the last few thousand years? Probably not. So we've been doing fine.
Right.
There's little tweaks we can make
Yeah.
for sure, but
Yeah.
it doesn't mean that you have to drink a super high sodium, athlete level electrolyte beverage when you're sitting on the computer all day. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I love your example of like looking at other countries and like elite athletes that have no access to the supplements that
Mhm.
our other elite athletes think are completely necessary for them to compete at the top levels. So that's a really cool example. The other thing I love to hear is, you talked about the labs that you like to do, and what I noticed about those labs is if you're going to supplement, you can measure the supplement. Like you measured an omega index. You
Yep.
can always, do you need to be on fish oil? Well, we can check. Do you need to
Yep.
be on, magnesium? Well, we can check. Like
Yeah.
I love that as you build out kind of the supplements that they need, it's not just like everybody needs this thing. It's actually like we can do this with some precision, which
That's
especially at the elite level seems like it makes a ton of sense. I think that that's how it should be for every supplement for anybody.
yeah.
But I love that.
Yeah, and that's precisely why we do it.
Um,
Yep.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. One thing I wanted to ask you about was I imagine you actually talked about caffeine causing GI distress. And I imagine you hear athletes say, well, yeah, my stomach's upset. Like there's a lot of people who think about like microbiome testing or food sensitivity testing. And I'm curious like how you educate your athletes on that and how you think about that.
Yeah, well, actually, just a very random coincidence. This isn't meant to be like a plug in any way, but my nutrition education partner and I, we have a company called Performance Nutrition Pros. We're actually launching it's called the Athlete's Gut Professional Practice course, where we've engaged with world leading researchers from Monash University in Australia. And we actually have a professional practice course that'll be launched in the next 2 weeks. And we're doing a free webinar on how to use probiotics with athletes as well. So this is very timely because it's something that in the practitioner space, a lot of people want to know how to use probiotics or how do I assess. This is important. The research is exploding, and we're trying to connect the dots. And so, and what I was going to actually mention with our last conversation was the next thing we might test is the microbiome. But we're still not there yet we're almost there, but we're still not there yet in terms of commercially available, reliable testing kits. And the other thing about the microbiome is it changes. It's rapidly changing and evolving. So if someone changes their diet or they have some alcohol or they decide that they're going to go meatless for a few days, it's a snapshot in time, that analysis as well. So, right now, I think where we're headed in the world of the microbiome is, okay, let's figure out how to assess it. And then let's figure out how to assess it in a way where it's telling us a story. Maybe we have to assess it serially, like a vitamin D, where we do it 4 times a year and get a sense. And then what's the newest thing now is I mean, most people will take like a broad spectrum probiotic and just throw it in the sink, so to speak. Or they may just consume some probiotic, high probiotic or prebiotic foods. But what we're learning now is like this concept of strain specificity. So there are strains now that we're learning about that can potentially aid in certain conditions, or potentially in the athlete space. Maybe we throw a specific strain in during a specific time in the training cycle. And there's new research. We're at the very beginning of it, trying to understand the biome's role in performance. And is there a way you can manipulate it to help performance? It's all very exciting. It's all very new. And so we're just kind of cautious right now and trying to learn. But it's definitely like a really exciting space. And we're learning more. So yeah, so I mean, it's definitely something that I think we're eventually gonna figure out. But yeah, athletes in general, they have all kinds of GI issues, basically because when you work out at high intensity, the blood to your gut goes away. and there's a little bit of a a strain on your GI system because your blood's away doing other things. And so over time, that actual shunting of the blood away and the frequency that our athletes do it can sometimes kind of compromise that kind of gut barrier. And so they can experience either like during the exercise bout gut issues, or chronically over time, depending on the type of sport that they're in, gut issues. With our combat sport athletes as well, and football athletes, there's a lot of use of like NSAIDs, for example. And we know that high use of anti-inflammatories can also kind of compromise your gut. So the gut in the athlete, it's a huge thing we could have a whole session on. But it's definitely on our radar. It's definitely on our radar, but we still don't really know yet, outside of just like, questioning the athlete around bowel frequency, symptomology, and kind of what their current experience is within their gut.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like you said, we could do a whole session on it, and it sounds like you have a whole course for professionals to dig in on it. So that's super cool. I've come to the same conclusion with microbiome. It's one of those things that people ask me about all the time. Like, because I would say the general population also has a fairly unhappy gut, and mostly because they don't eat enough fiber. Mostly they just don't eat a good enough diet. But people want microbiome testing because they've heard that it's so useful. And what I've found is what you found. It's so early. We don't really know what to make of it. There are some strains that look to be really interesting, and that, there are companies like Pendulum and the Akkermansia strain, and there are some very interesting things happening in the space, but still it's so early. It's hard not to pay attention to the space because there is so much happening, but it's also hard to know exactly what to do and what you can recommend in a really safe manner. So I'll definitely recommend people check out your course if they want to go deeper on what do we know today.
And usually I kind of backtrack it with my athlete too, because it's like, okay, what are your symptoms? And then what are they correlated to? And then, okay, well, this is always happening to me, after exercise, if I eat X, Y, and Z. And it's like, okay, well, maybe that fiber load is too high for that point in time when your gut's a bit shut off. So let's try a lower fiber diet in the few hours post-exercise to see if we can mitigate it, Or if you look at the research around like FODMAPs, that's a whole category of foods that can cause, issues gastrointestinally. So it's like, you have all these people doing all these like supplements that have maybe all these artificial sweeteners in them that they don't realize are sugar alcohols and are less absorbed in the gut. And maybe if we just got rid of those sugar alcohols, you would have some less bloating, And I've done that with athletes where we go, let's go through each of the elements of the FODMAPs diet, eliminate those, and check symptoms, and do them progressively in a very stepwise manner. And usually if we do that, we can figure it out. It's usually one of those guys. It's usually a sugar alcohol, maybe like dairy intolerance. Maybe there's some wheat stuff going on. Maybe it's a fiber, a specific type of fiber, or a cruciferous vegetable. We can kind of go deep and figure it out without any poop testing needed right now. Takes a bit of time and takes a little bit of reflection on the part of the athlete or the patient, but we can get there. It takes a bit of time and thinking and then strategic diet intervention.
Yeah, I understand the desire to just do a test and know what you need to cut out. Like that would be really nice. But I think the method that you kind of laid out, like you go step by step, you could do a full elimination and then slowly add back in. You could do, elimination of one thing at a time. There are different ways to do it. And you have to be patient if you actually want to figure it out and solve it. So I love that you kind of gave us that example of how to do it.
Yeah. And the food sensitivity testing, just a quick comment on that is, that's also a wild west right now. We've experimented, with a few different companies, and I've done a test under a pseudonym and my own name and taken a test a day apart and had 2 separate results. So I really doubt that my sensitivities changed over a day. But when you're coming back and maybe telling someone to eliminate, we've had athletes where it's told them to eliminate pretty much everything they like to eat: eggs, chicken, wheat,
Yeah.
dairy, and then they come to me and they like, you've taken away everything I eat every day. What do I do?
Right.
And then you go back to the question, well, have you had any symptoms? Well, no. Well, then you're fine. Our body's really good at giving us signals. Our body's good at telling us when something's wrong, and it's our job to listen to those signals. And if that's the relationship we have, that's, when we get a bruise, we have pain, like there's feedback that our body gives us. So maybe going back to that mindfulness of your body, because we can get worked up and stressed, and you just run, and you don't realize maybe I do have stomach pain all day long, but also just kind of coming back to like, how do you actually feel? You feel great. You're performing well. Well, let's just take this test and throw it away, because you're doing well. Your blood work looks good. Let's just keep going.
So I'd love to wrap up with just some of those practical things that you do with your athletes that people could use in their everyday life. And you mentioned some of the tools, but I'd love for you to kind of list out some of the tools you might have an athlete use to look at food sensitivities, or look at the food they should be eating, or like what are some of the tools you have them use?
Yeah. So in terms of like actual tools, it's a lot of the kind of collateral I've created for our team, So I'm like, go back to our kind of athlete education and nutrition. But yeah, so basically kind of looking at, what we talked about before. Let's look at the base of our diet. Let's look at, really getting some basic education around the composition of our diet. And you can even go to your local grocery store. A lot of grocery stores have dietitians that will give like grocery store tours, like how to shop. How do you actually, what's a proper way to shop in a grocery store? And the tenet of those tours is usually stick to the outside of the aisles. If you stick to the outside if you do 90% of your shopping in the outside, you'll realize you're on that whole food approach. Because the minute you start dipping in and out of the aisles, that's where all your processed ingredients usually are, right? Literally, that's kind of like shop on the outside. Build your diet. Get your hands dirty in the kitchen again. Really, there's so many great recipes out there that don't take a lot of time, that you can kind of whip up in 20 to 30 minutes, and so kind of getting back into that practice, making it a priority. If you can spend 30 minutes scrolling through Instagram, which most people can very easily do, you can spend 30 minutes prepping a meal, at home or for your family. So that basic there. And then when you're doing your physicals, getting a physical every year with your physician, and maybe adding some of these parameters that you might be curious about. If you think you want to take a magnesium supplement, maybe ask to have that added. If you think you want to take an omega supplement, ask to have that added. Figure out if you actually need these things, and help that build your plan. And I do think that if you're really kind of interested in having someone tell you what to do and really want to be guided in that way, then really making a visit with the registered dietitian, and spend a little bit of money, or most insurances will cover dietitian services. Just have a basic assessment done, and for the most part, you can kind of get some guidance that way. And then just being really being a critical thinker when it comes to the world of kind of, the diet culture world. The supplement, that's part of it too. The supplement culture fits into diet culture, and just realize that right now there is an industry. It is meant to target you. I love Chuck Norris, and he's in great shape, but every time he comes on with his wife on my YouTube, I'm just like, come on, Chuck. We know why you look that way. Plastic surgery, Chuck and Christy. But anyway, so just kind of understanding that and being able to filter it out too, because you do kind of sometimes get pulled away and oh, maybe I should do this. And then, that $350 you spend a month in supplements could have gone towards a consult with a professional to kind of get you on track. So, I would say that's the way to go, and really knowing that it's quite simple. Yeah. It doesn't have to be difficult. If you looked at the diet of Usain Bolt, you would laugh. And just some of these other countries where they just eat like rice, chicken, some plantains, some fruit, and you're just going like, oh,
right.
Okay, Yeah. And they're the fastest and best. And, you know, and they're just living off of food, and that's okay. No multivites, you know, they're good.
Somehow they're still the best in the world. So,
They're
yeah,
doing, we can do
Jen,
it, guys.
that
We can
was
do it.
right, right. Those were awesome takeaways. I think those apply to everybody across the board. I love the idea, like you have to take some time. You have to, maybe write down what you're eating because we know people are terrible at kind of recall
Mhm.
of what they're eating. But if you take your time and you write it down and you figure out like, am I eating 90% from first generation foods? I think that's an amazing place to start. And then all those different things you listed out, I think are great. Before we finish up, Jen, and thank you so much for your time
Of
today.
course, yeah.
Anything that you would like to leave the audience with?
Yeah, I think the other thing we want to talk about, because a lot of times I get pulled into this, like everybody just feels like they're doing it wrong. You know, like I'm doing it wrong. I'm not eating
Mm,
well. You know, I've got such a terrible diet, and and I kind of look at some of these people and I say, okay, let's just ask a few questions. Have you maintained a healthy weight? Are you in a healthy weight range? Healthy body composition range? Not your ideal weight, not like I want to be the same weight I was in college. Like, no, no, no. Are you in an appropriate weight range for your body? Are you healthy? Are you getting your regular physicals and you have good blood work and everything's in check? Those are the two things where I'm going like, then you're doing a good job, and sure, we can tweak and fix things, but sometimes I find people, a lot of almost middle-aged adults are having eating disorder or disordered eating because they're like obsessed about getting this many macros, and they spend, so much mind and so much energy on trying to, I don't know, they're just obsessed with it. Or they just think they're doing it
yeah,
wrong. And that's the fault of this kind of diet culture and supplement culture. They feel like they are missing something, or I should be taking collagen, I should be doing this. And it's like, okay, let's take a step back. Are you able to maintain a healthy weight? Are you able to exercise and do things you need to do, activities of daily living? And then are you checking out health wise with your doc? Okay, take a deep breath. You're doing great. That's amazing. And that's usually how I even go about it with my athletes. Is your weight stable? Do we have consistent performance? Are we achieving all the things we need to do to be a pro athlete? Then you're doing great. Let's look at a few things we can tweak, and we don't need to freak out. And nutrition doesn't have to be stressful and complicated. And then it's okay for you to go and have your birthday cake. My hobby is I'm actually a pizza person. I make my own pizza. I make my own dough. I have a pizza oven. We have these insane,
nice.
wonderful pizza parties. Again, the Italian in me, I have Napolitan style pizza every couple of weeks. There's so much joy to that for me. And that's what also food is about. It's about fun and comfort, and it's part of our culture. And so the fact that some people just kind of bastardize it all and they're afraid to eat a carb or a gram of sugar, like we got to take a step back and take a deep breath and just realize, like, what are we doing? We're doing okay. It's okay. Eat the pizza, eat the carb, eat the gram of sugar. Not all the diet, but I try to just be the voice
Yeah.
of I try to be the voice of reason, the Italian grandmother, eat, you're okay, it's okay. So I think that's kind of what I want my contribution to be. Is not I don't want to overcomplicate. I know all the complicated stuff in my head, and for my athletes, I try to just bring it down to simple things,
Yeah.
small changes, and always referring it back to their performance, their body comp, how referring it back to their daily asks that they have to do for their body. That was a lot of words.
Yeah.
Sorry.
And I think that message, like you're probably doing better than you think you are, is important for people to hear. And and the more that we can move to kind of a healthy eating mentality, I think is so important. And someday we need to swap pizza dough recipes. I do sourdough every weekend at my
Nice.
house. So uh, I would love to try your Italian pizza someday. So this was
Oh,
awesome. Thank you
yeah.
so
You've
much,
got to
Jen.
come. You haven't been to Colorado yet, so you come to Colorado, and I cook you pizza. There we go.
I love it. I'm there.
Gotcha. Awesome.
Awesome. Thanks, Jen.
Of course. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to another episode of Medicine 3.0. We make this podcast so that you know where to turn for good information on keeping you and your loved ones healthy. Feel free to check us out at bionichealth.com, where we can help you live a longer, happier life.